I will tell you what I saw, because the record the court filed is accurate in every particular except the one that matters most. It records the challenge. It records the outcome. It records the Veldornath I spoke on the arena court floor when it was done, which was the first time that address had been given to a non-Veldorn speaker in my reign, and only the 12th time in the recorded history of the ascending line. It records the compact delegation's departure 3 days later, Sergeant Cale Morrow among them, and it records the formal correspondence that followed between my senior advisor and the delegation's lead coordinator, which was routine in its entirety, and says nothing about anything that actually mattered. The record does not record the 11 mornings I stood at the East Corridor window. It does not record why I had been watching Sergeant Morrow since the 3rd day of his delegation's arrival, or what I had been telling myself about those reasons, or how those reasons compared to the actual reason, which was different, and which I understand now I was not ready to name at the time. It does not record what I said to him in the corridor behind the gallery access, when the gallery above us was still loud with itself, and neither of us had yet moved toward the door. I am the one writing this account. I will set it down accurately, because accuracy is the first obligation of a sovereign's record and the last refuge of a sovereign who has spent some time being inaccurate with herself about something that deserved better. I had been watching him for 11 days. Velkarak had been my champion of record for 7 years. He was the finest single combatant the Veldorn court had produced in 2 generations, broader than most Veldorn warriors by nearly half a hand's width at each shoulder, faster than his size suggested in the first exchange, trained from the age of 6 in the Veldorn method, which is a fighting tradition built on a single foundational certainty. Overwhelm the opponent before they find their footing. Come at them with everything in the first 10 seconds. Give them no room to recover. Win in the opening and there is no closing. He had won his first formal challenge at 14. He had won his 300th at 31, 3 weeks before the compact diplomatic delegation arrived on Veldorn Primary. He had never lost. The 300 wins were real. I want to be clear about that before I say anything else. Velkarak had earned every entry in his challenge record through correct and honest competition, and for 7 years the court had good reason to take pride in him. He was a genuine champion by any measure the Veldorn court has ever used to count such things. The boasting was a separate matter. It had begun, as these things begin, as something modest, a remark after a challenge. A comment in the training yard, directed at a soldier who had been outmatched and was processing that honestly. Humans are not built for this. I do not fault them for it. They are what they are. The comment had a narrow technical accuracy to it, in the context of a formal Veldorn challenge, and I had not troubled myself to address it directly because Velkarak won on the challenge floor, and the challenge floor was the court's primary concern. But 7 years is a long time to be unchallenged, and 300 victories is a long record to carry without revision. The boast had grown the way unchallenged things grow, slowly, and then all at once, and with the specific confidence of something that has never been tested against reality. By the time the compact delegation arrived, Velkarak had developed what I can only describe as a philosophy. Humans were the weakest species in the compact by every metric that mattered at close quarters. Reflexes, bone density, pain tolerance, the capacity to absorb a blow and remain functional. They were capable administrators. They were effective enough at distance combat. He was willing to credit them that. But in the formal challenge context, in the work that Velkarak understood as the real work, they were not a serious consideration. He said this publicly, and clearly, in the presence of 3 compact liaison officers on the 2nd day of the delegation's arrival. It came to me at the end of that afternoon, filtered through 2 advisors, each of whom had softened it slightly in the transmission. By the time it reached me, it was still blunt enough to require a response. I called Velkarak to my receiving room and told him, with the precision I reserve for things I intend to be heard once and not repeated, that the declarations were finished. The compact was the Veldorn Court's primary institutional partner, and the delegation in our compound was not an audience for the champion's philosophical conclusions. He would cease. He ceased, in the sense that he made no further public declarations in the 8 days between that conversation and the morning of the challenge. What he did in those 8 days, I learned later, was spend 2 of his morning training sessions in the training yard that was visible from the East Corridor window and the observation terrace, where the compact security complement had a clear line of sight. He ran the full morning form sequence both times. He did not perform it for anyone exactly. He was too careful a champion to be caught performing. He simply trained in a space where he could be observed, and he trained completely, and the form sequence in full is, by any honest assessment, something worth watching. I did not know about the training yard choice at the time. I found out later from my training coordinator, who had noted it as a minor irregularity in the daily schedule and mentioned it to me in passing weeks afterward. I mention it now because it is part of the accurate account. The compact delegation had arrived for the standard quarterly review. Trade provisions, border corridor usage agreements, the routine administrative maintenance of the relationship between the Veldorn ascending line and the larger compact structure. 14 members, a standard complement for a quarterly review of this scope. I had reviewed all 14 profiles before they landed, as I review every profile of every party arriving in my compound, because knowing who is across the table from my advisors is my responsibility and not a task I delegate. Sergeant Cale Morrow was not in the primary delegation roster. He was listed under Security Complement, Compact Frontier Infantry, 6 months attached to diplomatic escort duty. His posting to this specific delegation had been requested by the lead coordinator, who had noted in her internal request that Morrow had previous experience in the Veldorn compound and knew the layout. He had been here once before, 4 years earlier, as part of a smaller logistics assessment mission. His file described him as cooperative, experienced, and reliable. There was nothing in the file that would have caught a reviewing sovereign's particular attention. I noticed him on the 3rd morning. I pass through the East Corridor every morning between my archive review and the first formal session. The corridor runs along the inner wall of the compound, and there is a window at the midpoint that looks out over the lower terrace and, at an angle, the training yard beyond. I pass that window every morning. I had been passing it for 12 years. On the 3rd morning, I slowed as I approached it, not for any reason I had identified yet. I slowed, and then I stopped, because there was a man standing at the terrace railing and the quality of his attention was unusual. He was watching the training yard, where Velkorak was running the morning form sequence. He was not watching with the evaluation of a man assessing a threat. He was not watching with the satisfaction of a man confirming what he already knew. He was watching with the specific, unhurried attention of a person who has spent a significant portion of their life learning to read things correctly, and who has found something genuinely worth reading carefully. He stood completely still. Not stiffly, there was nothing rigid about it. It was the stillness of a person who has learned that stillness is efficient, that the body's quiet allows the mind to work. After a moment, Velkorak finished a sequence and looked up at the terrace. He saw Sergeant Morrow watching him. He said something to the honor guard soldier beside him. He laughed, the easy, carrying laugh of a man who does not think he is performing but is performing. Then he raised his voice and called something across the training yard. One of those declarations that is designed to travel far without seeming designed to travel at all. Something about the generosity of the compact in sending observers to watch a real warrior train. Sergeant Morrow did not respond. He watched for another moment, then turned and walked back inside. His pace was the same going in as it had been at the railing, unhurried, economical, not hurrying away from anything, not adjusting anything for the benefit of the training yard below. I continued to my session chamber. I told myself, through that first afternoon, that I had paused at the window because I was monitoring the diplomatic situation. There was a champion's remark about human combat capacity hanging over the compound, and the delegation had been in residence for 2 days, and a sovereign monitors these things. This was a reasonable account of why I had stopped at the window, and it was, in its way, accurate. It was also not complete. On the 4th morning, I was at the window earlier than I had been on the 3rd. I noted this in a general way and attributed it to a change in my archive session schedule, which was not true. Sergeant Morrow was at the railing again. He was watching the training yard again, and Velkorak was there again, though the morning form was already finished, and what remained was the supplementary conditioning sequence, which is less demonstrative and considerably more demanding. Velkorak looked up at the terrace once and found the human watching him and did not call across the yard this time. He returned to the conditioning work. Something in his posture had shifted, very slightly, in the direction of a man who is aware of being watched and has decided he is comfortable with it. On the 7th morning, I arrived at the window at the same time I had on the 4th morning, and I stopped pretending I was on my way anywhere in particular. He was not a large man by compact infantry standards, slightly under average height for a human male, with the compact build that comes from years of working in close quarters rather than the developed mass of a combat specialist. Gray at both temples, not extensively, not uniformly, but the specific gray of a person in their early 40s who has spent those years in the kind of work that leaves its marks. A scar crossing the left brow, healed cleanly and several years old. His field armor was compact tissue standard, matte black, and the surface had the worn quality that comes from a great deal of time in the field rather than storage. Not damaged, not poorly maintained, simply used in the way tools are used when they are the right tool for a long time. He moved through the compound with the economy of a person who knows exactly how much energy each task requires. No excess in it, no performance. The morning walks from the delegation quarters to the East Terrace, the afternoon sessions in the compound's administrative spaces, the twice-daily security circuit that the compact protocol required, and that he completed with the punctuality of a man for whom punctuality is simply how things get done. He said very little. In 11 days of delegation activity, I received 3 separate status reports from my compound advisors on the delegation's behavior and conduct, and all 3 mentioned the security complement as cooperative, professional, and unremarkable. 2 of those reports cited Sergeant Morrow specifically, once by the guest relations coordinator, once by my senior administrative advisor, and in both cases the word they reached for was unremarkable. I thought about that word. I thought about it the way I think about words that have been applied to the wrong thing. On the 9th morning, I authorized a discretionary security review of the delegation's full 14-member complement. It is a routine authorization that happens when a delegation exceeds its 7th day in the sovereign compound, and I applied it to all 14 members identically. The review came back within the day. 13 entries were routine. The entry for Sergeant Morrow included a note from my senior archivist, a precise, careful woman named Sorvith who has run the lower archive for 11 years, and who has never, in 11 years, included anything in a status report that did not need to be there. The note said, "The compact security complement Sergeant Morrow requested access to the challenge record collection this morning. He said he was interested in the formal challenge records from the last decade. I confirmed that the records are accessible to delegation members under standard diplomatic hospitality provisions and admitted him. He spent approximately 2.5 hours with the records. He read thoroughly and made no copies. He returned the records to their proper order before leaving." 2.5 hours. The full challenge record for the last decade includes the complete documentation of Velkorak's 300 victories, each entry running between 3 and 7 pages, depending on the complexity of the challenge and the level of documentation the challenge coordinator had applied. He had read all of it. I sat with that information for the rest of the 9th afternoon. Then I went to the archive myself in the late evening, and I read the last decade of the challenge record the way I imagined he had read it, looking for what was consistent across 300 wins, and looking, equally carefully, for what had never been tested. Velkorak won in the opening exchange. 281 of his 300 victories had been decided in the first 10 seconds. The remaining 19 had been decided before the third exchange. He had never, in his entire formal challenge record, been pushed past the third exchange of a fight. He had also never fought anyone who had read his full challenge record before setting foot on the floor. Velkorak issued the challenge on the morning of the 11th day, in the formal anteroom of the arena court. He did it correctly, the paperwork in order, the formal wording properly constructed, all of it technically unobjectionable. The substance of it was the philosophy in its most concentrated form. He wished to offer the compact delegation the opportunity to observe what a formal Veldorn challenge looked like from the inside. He was extending a voluntary slot to any member of the compact security complement who felt they had something to demonstrate. There were 4 of my advisors present, 2 of the delegation's administrative staff, and Sergeant Morrow, who had been passing through the anteroom on his way toward the East Garden and had stopped when Velkorak's voice addressed the room. The silence after the declaration lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Sergeant Morrow said, "All right." He said it with the tone he might use to acknowledge a change in the day's schedule. Flat, professional, attending. Then he turned to the nearest delegation administrative officer, a woman named Counselor Pravath who had, by the expression she wore, already filed the incident reports in her head, and said, "Is there a process I need to follow for this, or does he have the paperwork ready?" Velkorak had the paperwork ready. I heard about the challenge within the hour. I called Velkorak to my receiving room immediately, and I spoke to him for longer than I had on the previous occasion, and with considerably less precision, because precision requires a measure of composure, and what I had at that moment was its opposite. I told him what I thought of his judgment. I told him what the challenge represented in terms of the court's diplomatic standing. I told him that if he had been listening on the previous occasion, we would not be in the room we were in. He heard me through. He was patient about it in the way that a man is patient when he believes he is about to be proven correct and is tolerating the interval. Then he said, with genuine respect and without apparent awareness of how much that respect cost me to receive, the demonstration was warranted, and the sergeant appeared willing, and no lasting harm would come to a compact soldier from a properly conducted Veldorn formal challenge, and this was an opportunity to address the question that had been circulating in the court's periphery for too long. I dismissed him without answering. I sat for a moment. Then I called my challenge coordinator and instructed her to ensure that every standard medical courtesy was extended to the compact delegation security complement before, during, and after the challenge. Then I instructed my senior archivist to make sure that any request the compact security complement made for additional materials in the next 24 hours was accommodated without delay. I do not know if Sergeant Morrow requested anything. No additional request came through to my desk. I went to prepare for the afternoon session, because I am the queen and there was a court to run, and I told myself I had done everything that was reasonable to do. The challenge was scheduled for the following morning, second hour after sunrise. The arena court beneath the Sovereign Gallery was filling before the first hour. My court does not formally attend challenge proceedings. The arena court is a venue for participants and immediate parties, not for organized spectatorship. But Velkorak's record had made him a figure of considerable institutional attention, and the challenge involved a compact soldier, and those two facts together had moved through the compound overnight in the way that things move through a compound when the people in it have agreed, implicitly, not to discuss them. There were perhaps 200 people in the gallery and the standing balconies when I took my position in the sovereign seat above the center of the floor. I had not planned to attend. I had told my morning coordinator that I would be in my archive session during the challenge period. Then, at the beginning of the second hour, I found myself walking down the corridor to the sovereign gallery access, and I went through the access door, and I sat in my seat. The delegation's lead coordinator, Counselor Pravath, was in the observer section with two of her colleagues. She had the look of a person who has done the maximum possible preparation for an outcome that is outside their influence. Velkorak entered from the South Passage in full formal challenge configuration, the deep copper and black of the Veldorn warrior house, ceremonial enough to mark the occasion and functional enough to leave nothing in question about his intent. He was, as he always was, impressive. 7 years and 300 wins had given him something that the eye recognizes before the mind names it, the quality of a person for whom this particular floor holds no uncertainty. He moved to his position and stood with the complete ease of a man standing in the one place in the world where he is most entirely himself. Sergeant Morrow entered from the North Passage. Compact tissue field armor, the same worn matte black I had seen every morning from the corridor window. No ceremonial adjustment, no concession to the occasion's visual register. In his right hand he carried a standard compact infantry short baton, 40 centimeters of composite material, the training and close-quarters tool of compact frontier infantry, the kind of implement that has been used so long it has no interesting features. He had not asked about Veldorn weapon protocols. He had not requested a Veldorn instrument. He walked to his position on the floor with the same unhurried economy he had used to walk across the East Garden every morning of the 11 days, and he stood there. He looked up at the gallery once. His eyes moved across the balconies with the reading attention I had seen at the terrace railing, cataloging the space, noting what was in it, not looking for reassurance or audience. When his gaze reached the sovereign position, it paused for exactly the same duration it had paused on everything else, a single beat, then it moved on. I was holding my breath. I note it now. Velkorak made the formal opening address in the traditional 3-line Veldorn form. The challenge coordinator confirmed both parties' positions and consent. Then she stepped back, and the floor belonged to the two of them. The Veldorn method begins with everything. That is the only accurate way to describe it. Velkorak's first movement was full commitment, the maximum speed, the full weight, the 300 victory certainty of a champion who has never needed to modify his opening, because his opening has always been sufficient. Sergeant Morrow stepped back. Not an evasion pattern, not a defensive technique, a single deliberate step backward, unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world and was using exactly the amount of it he needed. The step took him out of the space Velkorak's movement occupied. Velkorak's force met the air where a person had been a fraction of a second before. A sound moved through the gallery, not a word, not yet, but the specific collective breath of 200 people encountering something unexpected. Velkorak recovered cleanly. He was too good not to. He found his footing, reassessed the distance between them, and reset into his fighting position. Something in his posture had shifted by a small degree, not uncertainty, not yet, but the adjustment of a highly trained competitor receiving new information and incorporating it. He opened again. Sergeant Morrow stepped back again. Same quality of movement. The same deliberate, calm withdrawal, a step and a half this time, slightly lateral, placing himself at a slightly different angle than the first time. The baton in his right hand had not moved from its resting position at his side. The gallery sound had changed. The collective breath had taken on a different quality, not quite murmuring, not quite quiet, but the sound of a large number of people beginning to revise an assumption they had all arrived holding. I watched Velkorak's shoulders. I know his form the way I know my own court. 7 years of watching him train and challenge and win. I have seen his shoulders in every configuration a fight can create. I watched them now, and I watched them process the second failed opening exchange, and I saw the first suggestion of something I had not seen in 7 years of watching him. He did not know what this was. He had 300 entries in his challenge record, and in none of them had anyone done what Sergeant Morrow was doing. Every challenger in those records had, at some level, engaged with the opening exchange. Moved against it, moved around it, absorbed it, broken under it. They had all treated the first 10 seconds as the center of gravity, because the Veldorn method trains everyone who encounters it to treat the first 10 seconds as the center of gravity. When you face a champion who has never lost in his opening exchange, you prepare for the opening exchange. You build your counter-movement. You develop your evasion. You practice surviving the thing that will come at you. Sergeant Morrow had read 2.5 hours of challenge records in the lower archive. He had read them slowly because he liked to be sure he had what he thought he had before he decided anything. And what he had found in 2.5 hours of careful reading was the same thing I had found in my own evening review of the record. A champion who had never been pushed past the third exchange. A champion whose method was built on the certainty that the fight ended in the first 10 seconds, and who had been correct about this 300 consecutive times, and who therefore had a method that had been correct 300 times but had never been required to be anything else. Sergeant Morrow had found the gap. And the gap was simple, in the way that the most important things are always simple once you can see them. If you decline to fight the fight that the champion knows how to win, the champion has to fight a fight he has never had to fight before. On the third exchange, Sergeant Morrow stepped back twice and then moved laterally, 1 step, smooth and low, and the baton came up not in a strike but in a deflection. It caught the outer edge of Velkorak's extended arm and redirected it. Not hard, not a counterattack in any conventional sense. A small, precise application of force that changed the angle of Velkorak's arm by approximately 15 degrees, which changed the angle of his subsequent step, which put Velkorak slightly off balance for the first time in his formal challenge career. Velkorak recovered. He was good enough to recover, but the recovery cost him half a second, and in that half second the sound in the gallery changed completely. What I heard was the specific sound of collective certainty dissolving. Not dramatically, not in an instant, in the way that certainty actually dissolves, which is gradually and all at once, a murmur that rises before it is a word, a held breath that releases before it is a response. 200 people who had come to the gallery expecting to watch a demonstration discovering that they were watching something else instead. Velkorak had been off balance, on the challenge floor. 301 challenges into his record, and the floor had moved under him for the first time. The fight lasted another 7 minutes. I will not reconstruct every exchange, because the Arena Court's documentation holds that record, and this account has a different purpose. What I will set down is what it looked like from the Sovereign Gallery, from the position I occupy above the center of the floor, which is the position of witness, which is the position I had taken without planning to. It looked like patience. Not strategy exactly, though it was strategy. Not calculation, though it was that too. It looked like the fundamental patience of a person who has decided how this ends and is doing the necessary work to arrive there, not hurrying it and not performing it, simply doing each part of it in the right order. Sergeant Morrow spent 7 minutes declining to fight the fight Velkorak knew how to win. He moved back. He moved laterally. He deflected rather than blocked, redirected rather than countered, accepted nothing that committed him, and offered nothing that could be turned. He made Velkorak work for every inch of every exchange, and every time Velkorak worked for an inch it cost him something small, and Sergeant Morrow paid nothing, because he had not committed to anything that could be charged against him. Velkorak was still very good. I want to record that clearly. He adapted more quickly than most champions would have adapted, because 300 wins had built him a real foundation and not a false one, and the honest part of him, the part that had made those 300 wins genuine, was working hard and correctly. He found several moments in those 7 minutes where he pushed Sergeant Morrow to the edge of his own method, where the lateral step was almost not enough, where the deflection arrived a fraction of a second later than it needed to. But each time he pushed, Sergeant Morrow was there, making the thing he needed to make just barely in time and no more. Just barely in time was sufficient. It had always been going to be sufficient. In the 9th minute, Velkorak made an error. A small error, a committed extension that ran a fraction of a second too long, a weight distribution that leaned slightly forward at a moment when it needed to be neutral. It was the kind of error that would not have mattered in any of his previous 300 challenges, because none of his previous 300 opponents had spent 9 minutes building exactly the condition in which that specific fractional extension would matter. Sergeant Morrow used the baton to redirect the extended arm downward. He stepped inside the subsequent off-balance movement, not through it, inside it, into the space Velkorak's own momentum had opened, and placed the baton across Velkorak's throat with the precise force and position that, in a live situation, would have ended the engagement. He held it there for 2 seconds. Then he stepped back. The gallery was silent for 4 full seconds. I counted them. I was in the sovereign seat above the floor, the position of the witness, and I counted 4 seconds of a gallery containing 200 people making no sound at all. Then someone in the standing observation balcony, I have never determined who, made a sound that was not a laugh and was not a gasp, and was not either of those things separately, but was both of them simultaneously, confused together in a person's throat by the encounter with something they had not had a category for until this moment. And then the gallery was loud in the way that galleries are loud, when they have watched something that will be discussed for the remainder of the lives of everyone present. I descended from the sovereign gallery. This was not procedural. The protocol for a completed challenge does not require the sovereign's presence on the floor. There is no formal mechanism for a sovereign's descent in this context, because the sovereign is not expected to descend in this context. I know procedure and I follow it, not because I am inflexible, but because procedure exists for reasons, and those reasons are almost always sound. I descended anyway. My steps on the gallery stairs are not quiet. The compound is old and the stone is old, and my footsteps on those particular stairs are recognizable to anyone who has spent sufficient time in the sovereign compound. By the time I reached the lower landing, the space between me and the challenge floor was organizing itself the way the space always organizes when I move through it with purpose, a clearing, an attention, a reorientation of the room's axis. Velkorak was standing. He had not been knocked down, Sergeant Morrow's technique had not required it, and Velkorak had the genuine dignity of a champion who intends to be standing at the end of whatever happens on the floor beneath him. He was processing, in the manner of an honest person receiving honest information, what had just occurred to him. His eyes were on Sergeant Morrow. Sergeant Morrow was standing on the spot where the baton had met Velkorak's throat. The baton was returned to its resting position at his side. He was not performing anything, and he was not doing anything in particular, and he had the quality that I had watched from the corridor window for 11 mornings. The quality of a person who is simply present in the space they are standing in, taking up the space that is theirs and no more, attending to what is in front of them without requiring it to be something different from what it is. I walked to the center of the floor. The gallery, which had been loud, became quiet. I stood before Sergeant Cale Morrow. I looked at him. He met my eyes with the same quality of attention he had given everything else in 11 days. Genuine, direct, not constructing composure but composed. The way a person is composed when composure is their natural condition, rather than a position they have taken. Then I spoke the Veldornath. It is the Veldorn sovereign house's oldest form of recognition, not a rank, not a classification, not a conditional designation. It is the address the house gives to a person whose demonstrated quality has placed them outside the categories the court normally uses to account for people. It names them. It says, "We have seen you, we have understood what we saw, and we will hold that understanding in our record permanently." It has been given 12 times in the history of the Veldorn ascending line. It has never been given to a non-Veldorn speaker. Cale Morrow, I said, in the old form first, and then in full compact standard so that it was complete and unambiguous and could not be called anything other than what it was. My house has watched you. My house has seen what you are. My house names you in its record, and my house will not set you aside. 200 people were holding their breath. Sergeant Morrow stood with the quality he had of receiving information accurately and responding to it at the correct scale. A moment passed. Then he said, with the careful precision of a man being as honest as he knows how to be, "I understand what that is. Thank you." Not diminishment, not performance. The plain statement of a person who had looked it up, because he was, I had understood by now, precisely the kind of person who looks things up when given time. I held his gaze for a moment longer. Then I turned and walked from the floor. The corridor behind the sovereign gallery access is used for movement and not for lingering. When the gallery above is full, the corridor below is empty. And in the aftermath of what had just occurred, the gallery above was full of itself, and the corridor was quiet. I stood there for a moment in the particular silence that follows a large thing. I was not planning anything. I was simply standing in the quiet corridor with my back to the wall and my hands at my sides, doing the thing that sovereigns do not often have the occasion to do, which is stand still and receive what has just happened. I heard his footsteps approximately 40 seconds later. He had come through the gallery access, which meant he had crossed the floor and moved through the gallery, which was the same economy I had watched for 11 mornings. He turned into the corridor and he saw me, and for a fraction of a second, his expression showed the only surprise I had seen from him in 11 days. Not shock, but the micro-adjustment of a person who finds something where they had not anticipated finding it and is accurately updating their understanding of the situation. Then he said, "You're sovereign." "Sergeant Morrow," I said. He waited. He had, I had observed over 11 days, the quality of a person who does not fill pauses for the sake of filling them, which in a diplomatic compound, where most people treat silence as a problem to be solved, was among the more unusual things about him. I said, "You read the challenge record?" "Yes," he said. "In the archive, 2.5 hours. "I read slowly," he said. "I like to be sure I have what I think I have before I decide what to do with it." I said, "You came here knowing how to do what you did." "I came here having read everything that was available," he said with care. "Those are different things. Knowing what the record showed me and then being able to do it on the floor, with your champion across from me, in front of your court, that was a different problem from reading. But you solved it." A pause, then. He'd never fought anyone who was willing to wait. Everyone in that record understood that the first 10 seconds were the whole fight because he'd trained everyone he'd ever faced to understand that about him. That's a real thing. He's very good. He would have beaten almost anyone who engaged with him the way everyone engages with him. He looked at me steadily. I just didn't engage with him that way. "No," I said. "You did not." He held my gaze with the directness that I understood now had been. From the first morning I stopped at the corridor window, the thing I had actually been watching. Not strategy, not calculation, the plain directness of a person who is actually in the room they are standing in. "The address you gave," he said carefully. "I looked it up this morning when I knew the challenge was today. I understand that it's significant." "It is," I said. "Then I want to be straight with you," he said, in the register of a person who has been straight about things for so long that it is simply his method. "I don't know what comes with it. I'm on a diplomatic rotation, and in 6 weeks I go back to frontier posting. I'm not a political figure. I'm a sergeant who wanted to read the challenge record, and happened to be present when someone issued an open challenge." "I know what you are," I said. He looked at me. I said, "You are the first person in 7 years to enter this court and read what was there to be read and act correctly on what it told you. That is not a common quality." A pause. Then, with the honest plainness I had come to recognize as his primary register, "That's a fair observation." "What I gave you today," I said, "carries no obligations in either direction. The Veldornath is a recognition and not a contract. It names something the House has witnessed. It makes no claims on what you do with the next 6 weeks or the frontier posting after." He considered that. He had the specific quality of a person who considers things at the speed that the consideration actually requires. "Then I'll receive it the way you gave it," he said, straight. "Good," I said. A pause settled between us. Not uncomfortable, the kind of pause that happens between two people who have each understood something about the other and are giving it appropriate space. He said, "He's going to be all right, your champion." I noted that this was the question he had chosen to ask in the corridor after what had happened on the floor. I noted it with the care that accurate things deserve. "He is," I said. "He is honest enough to receive what happened to him today and learn from it. It will cost him something to learn it, and he will not enjoy the interval between now and when it is learned. But he is honest enough." "That's the harder kind," Sergeant Morrow said, "learning from a loss." "Yes," I said, "it is." He nodded once, not the court nod, not the diplomatic nod, the nod of a person who has heard something true and is confirming that they have heard it. Then I said, "When you return to frontier posting in 6 weeks, the compact standard routing takes you through the Veldorn secondary corridor." He looked at me, careful, attending fully. "It is a longer route than the standard corridor," I said. "It adds approximately 3 hours to the transit, but the Veldorn secondary corridor station has a library archive. It holds the full Veldorn challenge record going back 600 years. A pause. "Not the last decade," I said, 600 years. He was quiet for a long moment. "That's a significant collection." "It is," I said. "The archive is accessible to any party holding a Veldornath designation." I held his gaze. "Which you now hold." He was still for a moment. Then, "That's a generous thing." "It is a correct thing," I said. "The record is there. You are the kind of person who reads records. It seemed reasonable to make the fuller record available to you." He looked at me for a moment with the expression I had watched for 11 mornings from a corridor window. The expression I had been looking away from before, which I did not look away from now, because this account is supposed to be accurate and accuracy requires that I admit what I had been looking at. "I'll take the secondary corridor," he said. "I know," I said. He inclined his head, small, genuine, not a court gesture but the gesture of a person who means what they are doing with their face. Then he walked back toward the gallery access, and I listened to his footsteps until the corridor was quiet again. I returned to my receiving room and sat for a time without calling anyone. The window there faces west, toward the outer compound wall and the sky above it, and I sat with my hands on the desk and watched the light change for a while. I am not generally a person who watches light change. I am generally a person who is doing the next thing. On this particular afternoon I sat and watched the light and thought, which is something I had been doing considerably less of than I should have for at least 11 days. I thought about Velkorak's challenge record, and the 19 fights that had lasted past the first exchange, and the gap that had been there for 7 years in the record that no one had read carefully enough to find. I thought about a sergeant from Compact Frontier Infantry who had asked my archivist's permission before he touched the record, and who had spent 2.5 hours with it reading slowly, because he liked to be sure he had what he thought he had before he decided anything. I thought about 4 seconds of silence in the anteroom before a flat, professional all right. I thought about the corridor window on the 3rd morning, and the 4th, and every morning after, and the thing I had been telling myself about why I was standing there, which had not been accurate, and the thing I had not been telling myself, which had. The secondary corridor route adds 3 hours to the transit. I had confirmed this before I mentioned it, which is the kind of thing a person does when they have already made a decision and are finding the form in which to present it. I am the queen of the Veldorn ascending line. I have a court of several thousand people across 3 systems and an administrative weight that does not pause for anything. I have obligations and protocols and a sovereign's responsibilities to the record she keeps and the court she runs and the people who depend on both. I also have a transit log notification from the secondary corridor station that will arrive in the sovereign record when the route is used, and that notification will carry a name, and I will read the name, and I will know that the 600 years of challenge records in that archive are being read by a person who reads slowly, and who will therefore find what is in them to be found. This account will reflect that I thought about all of those things, and arrived at the understanding that the Veldornath is a recognition, and not a contract, and the archive is a resource and not a promise, and a sergeant who declines to fight the fight you know how to win, and fights the fight he knows how to win instead is not a common thing, and the sovereign of the Veldorn ascending line has the right to make her court's archives available to someone who holds her house's oldest recognition. Those are all accurate statements. This account is accurate in every particular. I have been accurate about the archive. I have been accurate about the Veldornath. I have been accurate about the corridor window and the 11 mornings, and the word I had been telling myself about why I was standing there. The one remaining inaccuracy is the word unremarkable, which appeared in 2 of my advisor's reports and which I have been intending, since I read it, to correct. The Compact's own files will use whatever language they use. My court's record will not use that word. Sergeant Kale Morrow held the Veldornath of the Veldorn ascending line, effective the morning of the challenge, and the record will say what the House saw, and what the House saw was not unremarkable. The record will say what it is. A man who read what was there to be read, and who acted on what it told him, and who asked about the champion afterward. That is what the House saw. That is what I have been accurate about, here, at the end of this account, with no gallery watching and no court record requiring the seal. That is what I saw.